Welcome to Introduction to Phonics. My name is Dennis Murphy Odo. I will be introducing you to some of the key concepts in phonics instruction. The agenda: first we'll talk about some theories of reading, then we'll talk about some key concepts in teaching reading, such as phonemic awareness, teaching the alphabet, teaching phonics, and then we'll finish off with some practical phonics-related activities. Before we begin, let's pause for a moment to consider a quote by a well-known thinker, scholar, and researcher, Mortimer J. Adler. Adler says, "Reading is a basic tool in the living of a good life." Let's pause for a moment to think what he could mean by this. Some ideas that have been suggested are that first, by being able to read, we're able to learn vicariously from others' experiences. That is, we can have experiences through reading a book that we may never have by ourselves, such as jumping out of a plane or feeling what it's like to live in the past a long time ago. Another reason given for why reading is valuable is that modern society assumes that we can read. In this modern capitalist post-industrial society that we live in, signs abound, are all around us. Newspaper, internet, cellular phones, all of this assumes a level of literacy that we need to have in order to navigate our environment. Thirdly, and probably most importantly for language learners, being able to read gives us access to new language. That is, we can take a book, we can read it at our own pace, and we're able to get comprehensible input that we can then use to learn the language even better. So those are some ideas for why reading is so important for living our lives and living a good life. So now we'll go on and talk about some theories of reading. The three main theories we're going to talk about here today are bottom-up theory, top-down theory, and interactive theory. An interesting quote to keep in mind as we discuss theory is its value for us as reflective practitioners in the reading classroom. The quote comes to mind, "Theory without practice is useless, and practice without theory is mindless." That is, theory and practice both support each other. We need to have a theoretical understanding to inform our practice, and at the same time, we need to use our practice to think and flesh out our understanding of reading, the reading process, and teaching reading. Now, the first question we'll ask ourselves before we get into these theories is, why should we care about theory at all? As teachers, why is it important to us? Well, there's a few reasons. One is that when we have a good theoretical understanding, we're able to defend our methods. So if a student or a parent or an administrator questions what we do in the classroom, having a knowledge of the basic theoretical ideas behind the reading process lets us defend why we do what we do. Secondly, it allows us to be consistent. So rather than having a quote-unquote grab bag of activities that we rely on, we can use our knowledge of theory to discern what are effective techniques and what are less effective techniques, as well as to understand which techniques work together and which techniques do not work as well together. Learning theory also helps us to invent new methods. The quote is sometimes said, Knowledge of theory is the difference between a cook and a chef. A cook can follow other people's recipes, but a chef can invent their own. In this way, when we go into the classroom and we meet students who do not easily fit into the recipe book that is a curriculum or a textbook, we can adapt the materials to meet those particular students' needs through our understanding of how the reading process works. Lastly, having a knowledge of theory helps us to reflect and improve. So when things don't go as well as we would hope they go in the classroom, we're able to step back, reflect on that, given what we know about teaching and learning reading as well as the reading process, and make the necessary adjustments to do better in the future. So having considered some of the background and why we should care about the reading process, theories of reading, we'll now go on and talk a little bit about some examples of reading theories. The first one we'll discuss is the bottom-up theory. Take a moment to think, what could this be? What does this theory mean? Now, if you look at the visual, we can see there's an arrow going up from letter to word to sentence to paragraph, and lastly to text. In this way, a bottom-up view of the reading process argues that learners, when they come to a new word or they come to a new text, they literally add the letters and the sounds up piece by piece until they get a word. And then they repeat that process for the next word. And then they do it for the next word. And they add those words up and they get a sentence. They repeat the process again and they get a paragraph. They repeat the process again and they get a text. And once they've added all that up, they build an understanding of the text. So it's bottom up, from letter sound connections all the way up to an understanding of the text. They add these pieces up one by one. And that's a bottom-up processing view. If you take a moment, have a look at this slide and read the poem to yourself. "'Twas brillig and the sleethy toves did gyre and gimble in the wabe, all mimsy were the borogroves, and the mome raths outgrabe." This famous poem looks like English, but it's actually mostly nonsense words. However, our understanding of phonics and how the English writing system works helps us to be able to decode this, that is, sound out the words and on some level make sense of it. So we can see in this way, reading this poem demonstrates the ability to use bottom-up processing to understand, well, not to understand, but to use bottom-up processing to decode text. So this was the first theory of reading that came along, was this bottom-up theory. However, before long, other thinkers started to have doubts about this theory. Their biggest concern was that although it gives us some insight into how we decode unknown texts, it doesn't give us very much insight into comprehension. That is, how do we understand a text? So even though I can decode the example text here, we can see that I might be able to do that without necessarily having any idea what it is I'm reading. So that's one of the main criticisms of this bottom-up theory, is that it doesn't tell us how we comprehend text. So an answer to that was another theory, the second theory we'll talk about, which came along. And this was known as the top-down processing theory. Basically, it consists of the addition of pre-reading activities, that is, previewing and predicting, plus adding our background knowledge, for example, culture and language. Through using these two forms of knowledge, that is pre-reading activities and background knowledge, we use this to make predictions and previewing and asking questions that help us generate an understanding of the text. That is, we go through the text, making predictions as we go along, and we're just reading the text to confirm those predictions. And these scholars, the thinkers behind top-down views of reading, argue this is how reading really works. Drawing on our background knowledge to make predictions, ask questions that drive us through the text as we read. Now, if we see an example here, if I were to show you the title on the left and the picture, now we see an example here of top-down processing in action. If I were to show you the title on the right, The Hungry Bear at My Cabin, and ask you, what do you think this story will be about? You might be able to make some pretty good guesses. I suspect you'll tell me that the story is about a hungry bear and maybe someone's camping in the woods and the bear might be looking for honey or something like that. He might break into the cabin. Now you do this because of your knowledge of stories, your knowledge of the world, and your knowledge of how bears behave, gleaned from living, from watching TV, through reading other books and so forth. In this way, we use our background knowledge to make predictions. And as we read the story, all we're generally doing is reading to confirm our predictions. So the question then, some other researchers came along, some other scholars, and they said, well, this theory seems good. This top-down theory seems good. But there's some weaknesses in it. It's good for the fact that it helps us to see probably how very strong expert readers read, fluent readers, how they in fact do read, what their reading process is, and how readers who have a lot of background knowledge on a particular topic that they are reading about, it probably gives us some pretty good insight into how they read. However, these thinkers argued the problem with this theory is that it doesn't really tell us very much about how weaker readers read or how people learn how to read. And so these other researchers, they came up with another theory. And this theory is called the interactive compensatory model. They argue that actually the reading process is a combination of both bottom-up and top-down reading strategies. And it works in a compensatory way. So if a reader is reading a text, for example, if I'm reading a text about a very difficult subject for me, like physics, as I'm reading that text, the words and the vocabulary that I'm familiar with, I might draw a lot on background knowledge and approach those words and those vocabulary and ideas in a very top-down way. However, when I come to new words or new concepts, or in particular maybe Latin-based technical vocabulary, I'm going to switch into a more bottom-up form of processing to help me compensate for my lack of knowledge of that vocabulary and how to decode those words. So depending on the text and depending on the reader's background knowledge, they may rely more on top-down processing if they know a lot about that text. Or if they don't know very much about that text, they're probably going to rely more on bottom-up processing. But it's not that we choose one or the other. It's more that depending on our background and depending on the text, we use a combination of both. And that is the interactive compensatory model of reading. That is, we use top-down strategies until we see an unfamiliar word, and then we switch into decoding strategies to help us comprehend. The first key concept that we need to be aware of as a teacher of phonics is this notion of concepts about print. Basically, concepts about print is the understanding that learners have of how printed language works. This includes understanding that print has a message. That is, the markings on the page contain information that when they read, they will be able to understand. It also includes the understanding that books are organized. That is, they have a cover, they have a title, and they have an author. It also includes the realization that reading flows from right to left and top to bottom. And lastly, it includes the understanding that printed language has letters, words, and sentences. All children do not come to school with this knowledge. Some children learn this knowledge at home. They learn how books work by being read to by their parents or older family members. Other kids come to school and they don't know how books work, probably because they haven't been read to at home prior to coming to school. As a teacher, it's our job to ensure that everyone has these basic fundamental understandings before we try to teach them more abstract concepts like phonics. To ensure all learners have this understanding, all we really need to do is read a lot to our students. Through observing us reading a lot in the classroom, all learners will come to understand how it is that books work, how they operate. Another fundamental understanding that learners need to have is this concept of phonemic awareness. Phonemic awareness is the foundation upon which phonics is built. In essence, phonemic awareness is the idea that words are made of separate phonemes, that is, sounds. For example, the word cat has 3 separate phonemes: k, a, t. This understanding is crucial in order for students to grasp phonics. If students do not realize that the word cat has 3 different sounds in it, there's no way that they can map the individual letter C to the k sound. There's no way that they can map the letter A to the A sound, and there's no way that they can map the letter T to the T sound. So it is important that they understand that words are made up of separate sounds. This is phonemic awareness. The good news is that if we're teaching Korean learners and they can already read the Korean alphabet, Hangul, then they already have this understanding. They developed phonemic awareness in their learning of Hangul because, like English, Hangul is an alphabet. Now, phonemic awareness is developed over time. It's not a simple on or off function. It's not binary. It takes time, it takes practice reading, and it takes practice with a variety of activities. Some activities that really help promote phonemic awareness are singing songs, rhymes can be very helpful, poems, and other activities where learners engage in wordplay can be very helpful for developing phonemic awareness. Another important thing for developing phonemic awareness is simply reading. It's kind of a cyclical cycle. Phonemic awareness improves learning to read new words, and in the process, learning to read new words also improves phonemic awareness. As students read new words, they match the letters to the sounds, and they must first be able to identify the separate sounds in the word. Two examples of phonemic awareness activities that are particularly helpful in the EFL classroom are phoneme blending and phoneme segmentation. Phoneme blending works by the teacher giving the sounds of the word to the students, and then the students must say what the word is. For example, the teacher might say dog, and then the students have to say the word dog. The opposite other activity is phoneme segmentation. Phoneme segmentation works by the teacher giving the word, and then the students have to break it down into the individual sounds. For example, the word truck has 4 sounds, t-r-k. And the teacher gives the student the word, and then the students have to decide what the sounds are.